Graveyards aren't a lot of fun. Everyone there is always dead, and you'll likely be attacked by a demon if you go there at night. No, that just won't do. What we need is disco. This is an idea I had a while ago, but I never did much with it, so that's what we're doing now. I think these two concepts, disco and graveyard, they work surprisingly well together. They're kind of like opposites, but at the same time they fit together perfectly. Alright, discos are bright and colorful and overstimulating places, whereas graveyards are most certainly not that. Yet at the same time, a disco is usually set in a dark room, maybe with some fog for special effect. And if you were to just take that disco and plop it in the cemetery at night, it fits in very well. Though of course, that was just a starting idea. There's a lot of other things that need to be considered in order for this to really work as an environment for storytelling. And so, this is basically a breakdown of how I designed this place, characters, and got it to all fit together, along with some other general graveyard information. Though, if you just want to see the graveyard in action, I do have another video on my other channel, which just shows it off in more of a story format. Alright, so, first thing I decided to work on was not the nighttime, as I had more of an idea about how that would work, but instead the daytime, because, what would that be like? Surely it can't be disco all the time. Nobody likes dancing that much. And so, it felt right to have that be the contrast to the night. This would be the quiet time, the quiet hours. No bright colors or music or lights. It would just be like a normal graveyard. And doing it this way would make it more impactful at night when it would just completely switch. It could also create a sort of sense of dread or anticipation, because as soon as nighttime comes, things are about to get wild. Though, as you can probably tell, this isn't exactly a normal graveyard. Yeah, I know I said I wanted it to be more like a typical graveyard, but I just still couldn't make a normal graveyard without having a few weird things thrown in. Actually, something I want to talk about is the original attempt at making this place, and how I completely failed at getting the atmosphere right the first time. Alright, so here's the first one. As you can see, even though the idea is the same, the feel of the two places are quite different, and this is because of a few reasons. The first, I think, is due to the saturation, because the original one is way too saturated. And that's a thing that I've actually struggled quite a bit with art. I would just always end up making things way too colorful. You see, if you want to make something look very bright and saturated, you actually want to make most of the colors very gray or faded. Art is all about the contrast. And I don't mean like contrast literally in lightness and blackness. I mean like the balance of what you use and where you put it. If you want something to look big, then make everything else small. And if you want something to look bright, then put everything else in shadow. So if you want something to look saturated, then make everything else very gray and dull. As I said, this is something that I've always struggled with. So part of the reason I actually wanted to work on the disco graveyard was so that it would force me to use very desaturated colors. And a lot of the colors here are almost completely gray. And so by doing this, you can really see what difference it makes to the atmosphere. The first felt very tight and almost claustrophobic, whereas the second one is a lot closer to my idea of the place, and feels a lot bigger and a lot more empty. It also makes the few bits of colors I do put in the place really pop, such as the leftover confetti. I also got the scale of the whole place better by, as I said, just making the contrast better. To make things that were supposed to be far away feel farther, I just made them smaller. And to make things feel closer, I just made them a lot bigger. Like this tombstone that, takes up more than half the height of the canvas. It sounds simple when I just say it like that, but knowing how big and small to make something is something that I'm still trying to get right, even after all these years. Alright, but enough of the painting process. Let's go over what's actually in this place. Well, since this is a disco graveyard, of course that means there has to be a good deal of things with disco or music related elements to them. And that actually took a lot of time to figure out. Like, let's start with the tombstones. Since tombstones are such an important part in graveyards, I of course had to find a way to discoify them, without taking away the fact that it's a tombstone, of course. And so I experimented with quite a few different designs, but the one I finally went with was this one. It has the basic shape of a tombstone, but instead of something like a cross at the top, it's a microphone, which I think does a good job at conveying it's still a tombstone while having that music element. But I still didn't quite feel like it was enough, so I then added a speaker in the center of it. This also has the added benefit of allowing the tombstone to play sound, which also solves the problem of where the music would actually be playing from when night comes. Also, another thing about this shape that I didn't even realize at first was that they kind of look like figures in the fog, which really helps to add to the atmosphere. It also gave me the idea to design the creatures that live in the graveyard to look like the tombstones. This way you have to be careful to make sure what you're looking at really is just a tombstone and not something else. But I'm not going to talk about the creature's design yet, as it's too much to fit into this video. So back to the gravestones design, as there's actually another design I made later on, which is mixing a tombstone and a jukebox together. I'm honestly surprised I didn't think of this sooner, as a jukebox's shape is already very similar to a tombstone shape. And if I had thought of it first, I might not even have designed the first type, the one with the speaker in it. So probably good I thought of it later. I mean, the more variety, the better, so it's good to have both. I also just added in a lot of little music elements here and there. Like, for the gates, I tried to make them look a bit like music notes, or having some statues around the place resembling either music notes or, of course, disco balls. I also added a disco ball instead of a bell for this place. And as you might have spotted, there are plenty of bits of confetti and such scattered around. I find it really helps just add a tiny bit of color to the otherwise very grey place. Also, something interesting about graveyards and cemeteries is that they're not actually the same thing. So the word cemetery actually comes from the Greek word, well, I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce that, but basically what it means is sleeping place. And it just refers to an area that's meant for burying the dead. Whereas graveyards, although they also mean a place for burying the dead, they also have to have a church in them. So, I don't think this can be considered a disco cemetery, as of course there's that building there, which, at the very least, looks like a church, though really it's probably currently being used for more dance-related things than religious, but still, it was probably at one point a church. Another thing is also the difference between tombstones and gravestones, which I think I've kind of been using interchangeably, but they're not. So a gravestone refers to a slab of stone that's placed over where someone's buried, whereas a tombstone is the nice thick chunky one you usually think of first. Imagine the disco graveyard would probably not have gravestones. It'd probably just be tombstones and those light up disco dance floor pad things, whatever you call them, the squares that light up. You know what I'm talking about. Alright, but that about wraps up the graveyard, in the daytime at least. Now it's time for the real interesting stuff, the night. And this is where the whole disco element really shines, as, of course, right now this looks a lot like a normal graveyard. Now, the first idea I've ever got for this graveyard was the idea what a dance floor would look like in a graveyard, or like how it would look behind the branches of an old withered tree. I mean, like, think about that. Bright, colorful lights in a forest at night with fog. I just feel like it'd look really cool. And there was that idea that inspired me to make this. This was the first ever thing I drew for the disco graveyard. But again, this was a few years ago, so let's do it again. Alright, so first off, I made sure to make this area feel a lot larger. The first, again, just felt way too tight and small, when really my idea for this place was for it to be quite large. Also, another thing about this place was I actually saw it in a dream. Now, it didn't have the whole disco element, and I'm not really sure if it even was a graveyard, but there was this old big building, that church-like thing, that felt like something you'd find in a graveyard. And there were all these hedges around it. It wasn't exactly creepy, but really just more interesting. Actually, I don't ever really find my dreams to be scary. I have quite a few dreams about places that really should be creepy, but I never really feel any fear from them. They're kind of more like watching a movie or playing a game. Like, imagine you're not shaking in fear looking at this place as I draw it. You're just watching a speed paint of it. But if you were actually at this place at midnight all alone, you'd probably be at least a little bit creeped out. And so, for me, whenever I have a dream about a place like this, it's always in that way where I don't really feel like I'm there enough to actually be scared. It's more like just viewing it as a game or a video where I'm not actually in danger. But anyways, the place in the dream was quite similar to this, again without the disco element. There was a lot of hedges, a lot of fog, it was nighttime, and it had that kind of monument in the center. Now this was a dream from a while ago, so I don't actually remember what the piece in the center was. It might not have really been anything, but for this picture I turned it into a microphone. Also, the place in my dream was called Middle Grove, which is what the name of this image is, and it's probably also the name for the whole graveyard. I don't actually imagine the place is called Disco Graveyard or anything. It's just a disco graveyard as a type, but its actual name is Middle Grove. I also wanted this place to kind of be confusing. Like, sure, it's foggy in the daytime and all, so it's not like the easiest to see everything, but then at night, not only do I want it to be foggy and dark, but there's also just so many lights here and there that I imagine would be constantly changing every few seconds. I also imagine, of course, there would be music playing from the tombstones, but not all of them at once, but rather it'd play from a group of tombstones at a time. This way you can never truly hear the music for long before it suddenly shifts to another place. I also imagine it would just bounce around the place a lot, and it would end up getting quite distorted and such. So not the best place for actually hearing the music. Though I do imagine the music would be quite good on its own. Not like some cheap horror movie suspense theme, but a genuinely good disco song that would be catchy if it, wasn't for the fact that it was being played in a graveyard at night. Anyways, that's about it for the disco graveyard. Overall, I think I did a better job than my first attempt a few years ago, though I still feel like there is a lot of opportunity for more things to be added here. I really wouldn't be surprised if next year I revisit this idea and add a whole bunch more stuff to it. But for now, that's gonna do it for the environment. In the next video, I'm gonna go over the character design, because that was a whole nother thing. I mean, what would actually live here?